Imagine sitting across a massive oak boardroom table. You know the kind.
Oh, yeah, the really intimidating ones.
Right. And millions of dollars are on the line. The air in the room is just incredibly thick, and neither side has spoken a single word in like 3 excruciating minutes.
Just absolute painfully awkward silence.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, why do we let standard business deals, or honestly, even just figuring out who's going to unload the dishwasher tonight, why does it turn into a hostage situation?
It's a great question, and it happens all the time.
It really does. So you are joining us for a deep dive today into, well, a stack of notes on one of the most famous frameworks ever built to stop that exact madness. We are looking at getting to, yes,
Yeah, the foundational text born out of the Harvard negotiation project. It's essentially the ultimate roadmap for navigating conflict.
and the mission for this deep dive is really to shortcut your path to becoming a master negotiator. We want to help you ditch that traditional, exhausting battle of wills.
Totally. Because what makes these notes so enduringly relevant for you, someone just trying to navigate a world full of competing interests, is that they offer a complete paradigm shift.
Right. It's about getting what you need without destroying the relationships that actually matter. Because, let's be honest, most of us negotiate really poorly.
We do. We are naturally pretty bad at it.
We are.
Yeah.
And it usually stems from this trap the source material calls positional bargaining.
Right. Positional bargaining is essentially staking out a rigid stance and just blindly defending it. You lock yourself into a demand and your ego gets entirely wrapped up in, well, not backing down.
Okay, let's unpack this with a visual because I think the underlying friction here is fascinating. Think of positional bargaining, like two cars meeting in the exact middle of a really narrow one-lane bridge.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. Both drivers roll down their windows, they glare at each other. But it's not just that they're physically stuck. It's the social cost of backing up.
Yeah. Exactly. Because if you put your car in reverse, you feel like you are losing face while the other driver just watches you retreat.
Yes. So you just sit there, honking. You're completely stuck.
That captures the psychological lock-in perfectly. On that bridge, your ego is heavily invested in the position, not the actual goal of getting across the river.
You completely forget about the river.
You do.
Yeah.
And so you create conflict, you waste time, you damage the relationship with the other driver, and you get a completely suboptimal outcome. Because literally nobody is moving.
And the notes point out that people usually default to one of two terrible extremes in that scenario,
Yeah.
right? You have the hard negotiator who, like, revs their engine, uses pressure, and tries to intimidate the other car off the bridge.
Yeah, the bully approach.
Right. And then you have the soft negotiator who just immediately throws it in reverse and gives in because they prioritize preserving the relationship over their own needs.
And then neither of those works long term. The framework rejects both of those extremes and introduces a third way, which is principled negotiation.
Principled negotiation.
Right. The defining mantra here is that you are soft on the people, but you are hard on the problem. You focus on mutual gain, and you ground the discussion in objective standards rather than, sheer willpower.
But to actually execute that, to be soft on the people, you first have to deal with the incredibly messy reality that you are negotiating with a human being.
Which is always the hardest part.
It is.
Yeah.
Negotiators have egos, they have deep-seated fears, and emotions that just, well, they flare up unpredictably.
Which is why the very first directive in the text is to explicitly separate the people from the problem. We routinely confuse the actual issue with those human elements.
We take things personally.
We do. We tangle up the substance of a contract dispute with assumptions about the other person's character
Yeah.
or their intent.
Okay, I hear that, but let me push back a little.
Mm-hmm.
How do you actually separate the person from the problem when someone is aggressively attacking you?
It's really tough.
Like, if we are sitting in a room and the other person's emotions are just overflowing and they're hurling accusations at my team, it feels totally unnatural to just sit back and actively listen to that.
Oh, it is entirely unnatural. Human instinct is to either fight back or flee. But what's fascinating here is that the text breaks this down into 3 distinct human factors you have to actively manage.
Okay, what are they?
Perception, emotion, and communication. And when it comes to emotion, strong feelings will derail a rational discussion every single time.
Oh, absolutely.
So the framework recommends that you don't ignore those emotions, and you certainly don't do the worst possible thing, which is tell the person to calm down.
Oh, man. Never tell anyone to calm down. It never works.
It has a 0% success rate. Instead, you explicitly acknowledge them.
Wait, you literally point out that they are angry.
You do. You allow them to vent
Yeah.
and you validate the emotion. You say something like, I can see this delay is incredibly frustrating for you. And what happens psychologically when you do this is profound. Unexpressed emotions act like cognitive static in the brain. They literally block a person's ability to process logical arguments.
So they can't even hear your logic until they get the emotion out.
Exactly. By letting them get it out of their system without reacting emotionally yourself, you clear that static.
Okay, so you are validating their feeling, but you're not necessarily validating their argument.
That is the core of it. And that ties directly into the perception factor. You have to understand how the other side views the situation and just avoid the trap of assuming malicious intent.
Right.
The notes emphasize a brilliant rule here, which is understanding is not agreeing.
That's powerful. I mean, I can completely understand why someone feels they deserve a massive discount on a service without actually agreeing to give them that discount.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the third factor, communication. So many negotiations fail simply because people speak purely defensively or they just don't listen at all.
They're just waiting for their turn to speak.
Right, so the text emphasizes active listening, like actually summarizing the other side's views back to them so they feel heard. The psychological reframe you are aiming for is shifting the dynamic from you versus me to you and I versus the problem.
I love that. So instead of staring each other down from opposite ends of the table, we are metaphorically sitting on the same side looking at the contract together.
Exactly. You literally put the problem on the table between you.
But, okay, once you have lowered that emotional temperature
Yeah.
and you are looking at the problem together, you still have a core disagreement to resolve. How do you figure out what they actually want when they are demanding something that's just, impossible?
This is where we move into the second major concept from the Harvard Negotiation Project. It's about focusing on interests, not positions.
Interests, not positions. Okay.
It is about understanding the why behind the what.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text uses a classic example that illustrates this beautifully.
Oh, the orange example.
Yes, the classic orange example. So two kids are viciously fighting over the very last orange in the kitchen. If they use traditional positional bargaining, they just compromise. They cut the orange right down the middle, and each kid gets exactly half.
Which appears completely equitable on the surface, right?
It looks fair, yeah, but it's actually a terrible outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Because if a parent had just stopped to explore their actual interests, the why, they would have found out that one kid only wanted the peel to bake a cake.
And the other kid only wanted the juice to drink.
Exactly. If they had focused on those underlying interests instead of their rigid positions of, I want the orange, both children could have walked away with 100% of what they needed instead of 50%.
Such a perfect illustration.
But how does that orange translate to the complexities of the adult world? Like, let's take the engineering or construction sectors, which the notes actually mention specifically,
Yeah, the notes refer to environments like EPC contracting.
which is engineering, procurement, construction, right?
Right, essentially massive infrastructure building. And they mention FEDCA claims, which are the standard international contracts used to manage disputes on those mega projects.
Okay, big money stuff.
Huge money. In these worlds, a position is the rigid demand. So a contractor might say, I demand a $2 million claim settlement for this delay. That is their position.
Right.
And interest is the underlying motivation. Like, why do they actually want that $2 million?
And it might not just be pure greed. It could be that, they have a massive payroll coming up and they are facing intense cash flow pressure.
It could definitely be cash flow, or it could be risk reduction, or pressure from their board of directors, or even a need to preserve their industry reputation.
Or just basic operational continuity to keep the lights on.
Exactly. And while positions are almost always entirely incompatible, like you want to pay 0 and they want 2 million, the underlying human interests are often completely complementary.
Because basic human needs are universal, right? Security, autonomy, economic well-being.
Yes.
And to find those, the text recommends simply asking why and why not when someone makes a demand.
You really have to dig into their fears. You have to recognize that they probably have multiple interests at play. Like, they might need the money, but they might also need to look like a tough negotiator in front of their boss.
Oh, ego is always a factor. So you've diffused the emotion and you've dug past their rigid positions to find their true interests. Who wants the peel and who wants the juice.
Right.
But how do you actually build a deal from that? If you are staring at a massive budget gap, how do you find a solution without just splitting the difference and leaving everyone unhappy.
Well, you have to stop viewing negotiation as a zero-sum game.
Meaning one winner, one loser.
Exactly. The authors argue that most negotiators are paralyzed by the fixed pie assumption. They believe that if one side wins a dollar, the other side inherently has to lose a dollar.
And that mindset just blocks all creativity.
You have to actively invent options for mutual gain.
Okay, the text suggests some brainstorming rules here. I actually want to challenge one of them.
Go for it.
It says, a major barrier to creating options is premature judgment, and that we must suspend criticism temporarily. But, I mean, in a high-stakes business meeting, if someone throws out an idea that is obviously terrible or maybe even violates the law, shouldn't we kill it immediately to just save time?
It definitely feels more efficient to kill bad ideas quickly, but doing so destroys the process on a neurological level.
Neurological. How so?
When you judge prematurely, you trigger a fear of social rejection in the room. And people's brains literally shut down the creative risk-taking centers. They stop proposing ideas because they are afraid of looking foolish.
So they just clam up.
Right. And you become locked into searching for a single, safe answer way too early in the process.
So you are artificially limiting your options before you even know what the options could be.
You are. The text identifies 4 specific barriers to creating options. Premature judgment is one. Searching for a single answer is another. The third is that fixed pie assumption we talked about. And the fourth is this really toxic mindset of thinking their problem is their problem.
Meaning, like, if my supplier has a cash flow issue, that's not my concern, as long as I get my parts.
Which is incredibly short-sighted, right? Because if you don't help them solve their constraints, they literally cannot agree to a deal with you, and your entire supply chain breaks.
Wow, yeah, that makes sense.
So to overcome this, the authors say you must strictly separate the act of inventing from the act of deciding.
You brainstorm first, evaluate later.
Generate dozens of ideas, search for shared gains. The notes actually give some fantastic mutual gain strategies.
Like what?
Well, instead of just arguing over a single lump sum price, explore phased agreements. You could use performance incentives, variable pricing structures, or risk-sharing arrangements.
Oh, risk sharing is a great one. So if a contractor is terrified about the cost of steel skyrocketing and the client is terrified about the building opening late, they can build a risk-sharing agreement. The client takes on some of the material cost risk, and the contractor guarantees the delivery date. They protect each other's specific interests.
You expand the pie before you divide it. You look for contingent agreements. It shifts the entire focus from claiming value to creating value.
Expanding the pie makes total sense.
Yeah.
But eventually, the brainstorming has to stop. The creativity ends, and someone has to write down a hard number on a legally binding piece of paper.
True.
How do you divide the pie without slipping right back into that ego-driven battle of wills?
This is where we hit the principle of insisting on objective criteria. The goal is to agree on numbers without making it a test of stubbornness.
Right, it shouldn't just be a staring contest.
Exactly. Agreements shouldn't depend on who can yell the loudest or who has the most hierarchical power. They should be based on fair, independent standards.
So we're talking about anchoring the negotiation to things like market value, legal precedent, expert opinions, technical standards, or even audited costs.
Yes. And the reasoning behind this is brilliant. Objective standards remove the emotional sting of concession. They increase the legitimacy of the agreement.
Because you aren't backing down to them, you're backing down to the data.
Exactly. The more both sides defer to a benchmark like, say, using a Blue Book value for a used car, the less either side feels like they had to surrender to the other person. It is not you beating me, it is just the math.
This leads me to a really critical question about power dynamics, and specifically a concept in the text called negotiation jujitsu.
Oh, this is a fun one.
Yeah. So if I'm negotiating and the other person completely ignores all the subjective criteria, they just cross their arms, glare at me, and say, that's my final offer, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
My instinct is to either storm out or fight them.
Yeah.
How does negotiation jujitsu actually work to de-escalate that?
If we connect this to the bigger picture to understand jujitsu, we first have to rethink where power actually comes from. Traditional thinking says power comes from status or aggression. But the text argues real power comes from preparation, from legitimacy, and most importantly, from your BATNA.
BATNA. B-A-T-N-A. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
Right. Your BATNA is simply the realistic course of action you will take if these negotiations completely fail.
It's your plan B.
Yes. Do you have an alternative supplier lined up? Will you take the case to arbitration? Can you just manufacture the part internally?
Mhm.
You should never, ever enter a room without knowing your BTNA.
And if the offer on the table is worse than your BTNA, you confidently walk away.
Exactly. But people often confuse their BTNA with what they hope to get, rather than the cold, hard reality of what they are left with if the deal dies.
That's a huge distinction. A BTNA isn't a wish list.
Not at all. Knowing you have a solid, realistic backup plan removes desperation. It gives you immense psychological armor.
Okay, so how does that tie into jujitsu?
Now, regarding negotiation jujitsu, when someone hits you with an aggressive take it or leave it, jujitsu means you don't absorb the force of that attack, and you don't meet it with equal force.
You don't yell back.
Right. You step aside and let their momentum carry them past you, redirecting that energy back to the problem.
What does that actually sound like in the room, though?
Well, instead of getting defensive, you ask a procedural question. You say something like, can you explain the standard you are using to arrive at that number? Or help me understand the basis for this proposal.
That is fascinating. By simply asking, what standard are you using? You are forcing an entirely different process in their brain.
Exactly.
You are pulling them out of the emotional fight-or-flight response of the amygdala and forcing them to engage their logical prefrontal cortex to answer a boring procedural question.
It deflates the aggression completely. They either have to justify their stance with logic, which they usually can't if it's just a raw power play, or they have to return to the table to discuss objective criteria. It prevents the escalation cycle.
The notes also outline something called the one-text procedure for when things get incredibly complex or egos are just way too entrenched. How does that practically work?
Think about a typical multi-party negotiation. Everyone brings their own draft of the contract, right?
Oh yeah, and the documents look like a battlefield of red ink.
Exactly. Everyone fights over every single clause because it is their draft versus your draft. The one-text procedure changes that. It brings in a neutral third party, or one party acts as the facilitator. They create one single draft.
So one document for everyone.
One document. They take it to party A, ask for criticisms, revise it. Then they take it to party B, ask for criticisms, revise it.
So they just keep walking the same piece of paper back and forth between the groups.
Yes. It completely removes the ego attachment. You are no longer defending your personal document. You are all just critiquing a neutral piece of paper until you can't improve it anymore.
That's brilliant.
It really is. It has actually been used to broker massive international peace treaties because it bypasses the ego entirely.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly civilized. It sounds perfectly logical. But I have to bring up the messy, hyper-competitive, real world.
Right, where things aren't always so civilized.
Exactly. What happens when this civilized framework collides with a bad actor? Somebody who absolutely does not want to play fair, or maybe a monopoly that holds all the cards and just doesn't care about mutual gain.
It's a very fair point, and the source material is remarkably transparent about the criticisms of getting to yes.
So it does have blind spots.
It does. While it is used successfully everywhere, from global diplomacy to local labor disputes, critics point out some severe limitations. The main critique is that the framework is just too idealistic.
Because it assumes a baseline level of rational behavior from the other side.
It assumes both parties ultimately want a fair resolution. Critics argue it underestimates severe power imbalances. If you are negotiating with a monopoly, your objective criteria might not matter to them at all.
The notes actually mention a modern counter-movement, specifically led by experts and followers of the book, Never Split the Difference.
Yes, that's a huge one.
And they argue that the Harvard framework basically misses the boat on how humans actually operate in high-stress situations.
That is a massive debate in the field right now. The modern tactical school of thought, which is often born out of hostage negotiation, argues that humans are inherently irrational and deeply emotional.
So logic isn't enough.
Right. They suggest that tactical empathy, psychological leverage, and understanding the emotional dimensions of a deal are far more important than logical problem solving.
They argue that a purely principled negotiator might just get eaten alive by a truly manipulative counterpart who knows how to use leverage and psychology against them.
This raises an important question about which approach to use. And just to be clear, we aren't endorsing one philosophy over the other here. The notes present this as a vital, ongoing debate.
It's good to have both toolkits.
Absolutely. The tactical school offers incredible tools for dealing with bad actors or highly emotional crises. But even the fiercest modern critics generally concede that getting to yes is the bedrock of the entire field.
Because it shifted the paradigm.
It was the crucial text that shifted the world away from just shouting at each other to actually trying to build value together.
So what does this all mean? It means it's the foundation. You have to understand the mechanics of principled, rational negotiation before you can start adapting those rules for hostile environments.
Precisely. It provides a universally applicable, repeatable framework for conflict de-escalation. Whether you are dealing with a rational partner or trying to stabilize an irrational one, separating the people from the problem is always a necessary first step.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let me quickly fire off the ultimate takeaways for you, the listener, from this entire stack of notes.
Let's hear them.
First, absolutely do not negotiate rigid positions. Dig for the underlying interests. Second, separate the people from the problem. Preserve the relationship while you ruthlessly attack the issue.
Crucial.
Third, use objective standards to create fairness. Fourth, create value before you try to claim it. Expand the pie. Fifth, never walk into a room without knowing your BTNA.
Your backup plan.
Exactly. Sixth, listen actively because information is leverage. And finally, treat negotiation as collaborative problem solving, not warfare.
That is an excellent synthesis of the core thesis. As we close out, I want to leave you with a thought regarding how the modern world is complicating all of this.
Okay, what's that?
Well, we talked extensively today about reading emotions, active listening, and dealing with human beings in a room. But consider how much of your professional conflict today happens over email or Slack, or even through AI intermediaries.
Oh, wow. Where you can't hear their tone of voice, you can't see their body language, and you definitely can't let them vent verbally.
Exactly. How do you uncover someone's true hidden interests? How do you separate the person from the problem when the person is just a blinking cursor on a screen?
That is tough.
As text-based communication strips away our natural human signals, adapting these principles of empathy and active listening to a digital environment might be the single greatest negotiation challenge of the next decade.
That is a fascinating problem to chew on. How do you build mutual gain in an email thread? Such a powerful concept to carry with you into your next digital standoff. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel a little more equipped, a little more confident, and ready to tackle whatever negotiations come your way. Until next time, keep learning.
See also the CMC video on 10 steps to master negotiation or visit our shop. See the links in the description. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see you next time.